Autism, Asperger's syndrome, and the different flavors of pervasive disorders make cosmic sense. It was my reading of Carl Gustav Jung that made the cosmic sense. One by one, as I read his ideas, they seemed familiar. Psychological types seemed to spell out who I was. How can a high-functioning savant understand normal meanings, let alone Jung's concepts? That's a very fair question for anyone to ask. Intuition, which I call leaking God energy, is something that comes through any individual regardless of impairments. One may not always be able to express intuitions. They're there nevertheless. Any bright idea that any person has is felt in a special way. The ability to act on it, the ability to express it, the ability to name it is a totally separate issue. Psychological types was the first familiar idea Jung used to describe my world. The second familiar idea was archetypes. The third familiar idea was the shadow, everything I don't know about myself. My intuition recognized the truth of his writings, his insights, although I couldn't, for a long period of time, do very much about them. I remember so distinctly reading psychological types. I was in talk therapy at the time. I walked into my shrink's office, enthusiastic that I'd actually identified my psychological type. I was an introvert. I was a thinking type. I had intuition. But I had no feelings, not few feelings, no feelings, and no sensations, no taste, no smell. I somehow knew that was true intuitively. I was human machinery. I was a savant. I was a high-functioning savant. I had a talent for numbers. I had a talent for my glue mind memorizing everything it saw. And I had no talent for much more, to me, difficult challenges like saying hello. It was much easier for me to put together a complex financial transaction than to feel comfortable saying hello to somebody. Saying hello had such demands of feelings and sensations, I couldn't deal with it. Seeing felt like death. The simple tail end of a visual perception seemed as if I was going to fall off the end of the world. So much of my behavior was circular. Not in the way that the one normally thinks of extreme cases of autism where a child might walk in circles and scream and bang his head against the wall. It was circular in a much larger way. And my circles were a message. Jung says, ideas can appear which never have been conscious before, and they grow up from the dark. I intuited, I concluded, I guessed, leaking my God energy, that maybe I could find somewhere within myself my non-existent feelings and sensations. It was an act of faith, an act of desperation, and thus began my 10 years of 24/7 becoming my own doctor to my own patient, watching, like a scientist, every single thing that I said and did until a pattern would emerge. Strangely, recognizing a pattern and recognizing it truthfully was often the same thing as resolving it. I do not understand the process completely, but I certainly saw it happening. Jung's second big idea, which catapulted me into trusting him, and trust was something that I did not easily have, was his theory of archetypes. Archetypes are pure forms. His theory of archetypes is probably similar to Plato's theory of ideas or ideal forms. Imprecisely, it is a world right next door to ours where everything is larger, more important, where it's absolute. It's also very cold. I believe the world described by Jung as archetypes and by physicists as parallel universes and by Plato as a world of forms is the world where autistic people live. When I read it, I knew that I was living in that world. And boy, was it cold. It's very cold. And I could not have said then, it's cold. To me, coldness was life. I didn't know that there was warmth. Only as a result of this long-term process and the regeneration of my feelings and sensations can I now say I was cold. Time is very distorted in this parallel world that I was living in, the world of autism. There's no beginning, there's no end. I was stuck in timelessness. It's another dimension of experience. It's another dimension of time. Life is over here, and eternal forms are over there. I was an autist living in a world of forms and adapting by memory into day-to-day life. The inscrutable mystery of speechlessness, aphasia, echoing, echolalia, hearing echoes, that is one of the conditions of autism, has never been adequately explained. I had a different version of it. I actually heard my natural voice, my unmemorized voice, for the first time in a very special situation in 1986. I had remembered a very kind moment where my maternal grandfather was taking me on a Sunday morning to buy a bar mitzvah suit, and I remember the feeling of his hand. I had a form of talking aphasia. I believe the origin of aphasia, echolalia, my version of aphasia, talking aphasia, words that don't have meaning, partially learned from living in a family that didn't communicate very well and spoke words without meaning. Words felt like rolling a rock up a hill, like the myth of Sisyphus. My ability to visualize rolling a rock up a hill every time I spoke was very important in refinding in the depths of my being exactly where Jung said it would be. Never heard before my natural voice. It took from 1986 to past the year 2000 before I could speak in my own natural voice comfortably in all situations. Dread was a moving target. The experience of autistic dread, the parallel world dread, archetypal dread, the dread of living in a timeless space and inhabiting a human body but not having the feelings of a human, the fear of death hung on every single word. My dad spoke very well. His words never had meanings. No one could ever recall having a two-way conversation with Daddy. But he sounded like a poor man's Winston Churchill. He memorized everything, and I did too. Somewhere within my lack of speech, where words might have meaning, there was a natural voice where words did have meaning. I did locate that place. It took a 10-year vow of silence. I did not allow myself to talk in the fashion in which I was brought up. My voice was hidden somewhere in the world of archetypes, the place which is the origin of, I believe, every speech disorder for every pervasive disorder known to man, every variation, none of it explained by modern science. Aphasia is the unmediated experience of eternity. It is minus the right genes to contain feelings or sensations. All of the scientific blame attributed to genes, vaccines, and other causes are all causes that enable an invasion of eternal forms to paralyze human speech. Leaking God energy, paying attention to my very inner intuitions and voices, and separating myself from day-to-day life until such time as my voice could come through loud and clear. My real voice, not my rote speech learned voice, not the one that I was trained to use in my childhood. "24/7, 4 decades of silence and abstention enabled me to find within, to see myself in a different light, and to understand, and understanding that